Good evening, everybody. I had some technical difficulties this evening, so I will be not having the normal intro, but I'll give everyone a couple minutes to sign in because I usually let it roll for a few minutes. So hang tight, and we'll get started in a minute. All right, good evening, everybody. Excited to be here. As I mentioned just at the beginning of this, I've had some severe technical difficulties. It probably looks very different. I could not get my camera working properly, so I had to switch computers and everything, but I think we're rolling, and I do have a good microphone at least, so that should be good. We have Terrance Layhew on this evening, and Terrance is an organic inspector and also a podcaster. If you guys have ever heard of the Intellectual Agrarian, that's his podcast, and just an amazing part of the community and very knowledgeable about lots of things. We'll try to keep the the discussion focused on organic inspection and maybe some stuff about the farming community and things like that. But let's get Terrance in here, and we can talk all things organic inspection and all that kind of stuff. And hopefully people are rolling in now, and hopefully everything is working properly. And again, apologize for the change in quality, but at least I'm here and we got Terrance, so we'll bring him in. Hey, Terrance, we got you?
I think so.
Awesome. All right. So, Terrance, you are a podcaster, so you completely understand the technical difficulty side of things. If I couldn't have a more patient guest on this evening. So, Terrance, thank you so much for putting up with me for the last half an hour, and thanks again for coming on tonight. Can you let everyone know a little bit about what you do? I said you're a podcaster, but also a organic inspector, and that's your job. So if you want to tell everyone a little bit about yourself, just get started, that would be cool.
So yeah, I'm an organic inspector and podcaster. I was podcasting before I started full-time inspecting, but what I think is hilarious every now and again is I kind of started doing both around the same time. And I found that the better I got at my podcast interviewing, the better I got as an organic inspector, because part of the job of being an organic inspector is talking to people, talking to the farmers, asking them about what they're doing, making observations, just having a conversation. And really, that's what we do when we do these types of podcasts or interviews, is it's just a matter of having a conversation. And in an inspection, I mean, farmers can get a little nervous or uptight because here you're showing up this stranger, this weirdo with a clipboard or an iPad and asking them all these questions. Anything you can do to put them at ease makes a difference. So yeah, I got into that. I started inspecting when I was 19, I think. I've been doing it for about a half a decade. I've also been doing the inspections now for the podcast for about half a decade, which is strange because I don't think I've done that many episodes until I look back and go, oh, wait, I did.
Yeah, I know how that goes. I'm like, wait, I've done 200 and something YouTube videos. How did that even happen? I totally get it. So, Terrance, how did you get into all this? Did you have a farming background? Your family's into this, or something you learned about? Like, how did this all happen for you?
So I became involved in farming, kind of kicking and screaming as a younger kid. My father became the manager of an organic grass-fed cattle farm, and it was cool. It was fun. Growing up into it. I mean, when I was 13, 14, 16, I couldn't care less, but I gradually grew to enjoy it more. And part of it was finding out where my place in it is, because I'm not a guy that raises animals. I'm not the guy that raises vegetables. But what I found I was really good at is I actually did farmers markets. And I did that for several years. And I got really good at talking to people. And once I stopped doing farmers markets, I launched the podcast. Through working with the farm, I knew I liked organics. Was told I was better with the paperwork than half the people that worked for the agency that certified us. The guy that I asked questions from, I asked him the questions about the paperwork. He's answering them. He looks at me and goes, "Boy, have you ever thought about being an organic inspector?" And me, I look up at him and say, "Well, sir, I think that's a great idea, but I should probably graduate high school first." And so that's kind of how I found out the organic inspections was something that I might be good at. And sure enough, I've at least become marginally proficient at it, working our way to mastery.
Okay, so how long you been an organic inspector? You said half a decade?
About half a decade now. I think it's been 5 years.
Okay. All right. So I want to get into some of that stuff, obviously, as a career, but can you talk a little bit about just organic certification in general? Like, how did it start, sort of the organic movement, some history behind it, I think, just to get people on board?
So there's a long history of organics well before certification. In fact, that's the fascinating thing when I get to go to these different organic conferences, which I mean, I desperately missed last year. But as I went to these different conferences, the thing that was always interesting to see were the older generation talk about the pre-NOP days. The NOP is the National Organic Program, which is the USDA's organic certification, basically. And so organic was a term that kind of came out of Rodale in the early days. And that became just this way to kind of describe how they farmed without using chemicals or certain things. The problem was, though, there was no specific standards. Everyone had their own rules. I currently live in the state of Iowa. Iowa had an organic department that had their own rules before there was a national organic standard put out by the USDA. Basically, what happened was a lot of the organic farmers groups went to the U.S. Department of Agriculture and said, please bring some standardization to what we need, what we're looking for. One list of rules instead of every state or county having their own organic rules. So USDA was like, are you sure? Okay. Well, they did it, and they actually took it, came up with these rules, gave it to the different groups, and the groups said, that's not hard enough. That's too lax. We need it tougher. And the USDA said, really? You want it tougher? Well, okay. And they actually came back with something then and talked with the farmers, and they came up with this body of rules that is now the National Organic Standards. That came out, I think it was official in 1997. I could be off on the dates, but I know it was around that era, because the organic certification that is the USDA stamp has only been around for a little over 20 years. Most people don't realize that. But so that was how the USDA got involved. The way I try to explain it is, if you have any idea what it means to have a license to make something, that's what the USDA seal is. It's a marketing image that you can use, but it needs to meet a certain spec standard and go through certain hoops. And that's what the organic symbol is. And that's why some of even the people watching here may be farming organically, but not certified organic, where they can use the little seal, because the USDA owns that seal and can basically say yes or no to people using it.
So, okay, so mid-90s certification became available, but like really the idea of organic growing
has been around for a long time.
Okay. The way I understand it was sort of like a few decades before that, maybe more on the West Coast, and sort of the food movement that was happening there. Maybe I don't have that history correct. You probably know better than me, but
Rodale, well, the word itself came out of Rodale, which
okay.
I believe is on the East Coast, if I remember right. And it grew out of that back to the earth movement. And again, the timeline, it's got a long history. I mean, if we're thinking about it logically, though, like I talked to my great grandmother, she's in her like 92. I described to her like what I'm looking at when I'm looking at an organic farm, and she's like, oh, that's exactly what we did.
Right.
Really, it's not so much that organics is radically different. It's really that it's doing things the way it was before we hit the mega agricultural revolution post World War II.
Okay, so it's kind of a recertification of the way we want it to be growing before all of the chemicals and stuff got introduced into agriculture.
Yes, and I do want to make a point though here, because I think that it's an important one. It's really easy to talk about organics in terms of what it isn't, which is that it isn't using pesticides, it isn't using insecticides, it isn't using GMOs, it isn't using sewage sludge, which is a disgusting thing. But what we ignore is all of the benefits. It's also promoting biodiversity. It's also in requiring crop rotation. It's adding a requirement to be building and maintaining your soil organic matter. All those things that ideally are going to make things better and better. And that's part of the reason why now even Rodale is working on making, I think they call it the regenerative organic standard, which is basically organic plus, where they're making specific metric goals for how you're improving your carbon sequestration and how you're building your soil organic matter.
Okay, so I have so many things I want to talk about. I think a lot of times I'm not certified organic for a few reasons, but I'm not like against it. I don't really find it a benefit for my farm.
It's a marketing thing,
right?
At the end of the day, it's for marketing. I have a buddy who, small scale vegetable grower. He farmed organically for years. He didn't ask for certification up until the restaurants he was selling to said, "Hey, we know that you farm this way. Would you get the symbol for us so that we can market your products as certified organic on our menu?" And that's when he did it.
Okay, so I want to talk about certification stuff in a minute, but in terms of marketing, all right, let's talk about the word organic. Like, how is that accepted now from the public? I know that customers are confused and they think organic means no chemicals, no sprays. I mean, you can use organic sprays and things like that that fall within the certification. So there's a whole misconception now about organic, what that means, what that is. How are you feeling about that? Is that part of like your whole world is like trying to, educate the public and talk about that a little bit?
So I personally haven't done this a whole lot beyond just, I'm at the party, people go, "What do you do?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm an organic inspector." And yes, that expression, that is exactly what happens. I have to then explain, and then of course, inevitably, well, what is organic? And that's when I have to describe it. But I have to give props. There's another organic inspector I know. He actually has done this thing called, I'd like to say it's Meet the Organic Inspector, where he basically sets up, he works with, there's some grocery stores he knows, that he like sets up this little booth and explains what organic is to people walking through the store. I think that's awesome. That's cool. I haven't had the time or inclination to try it myself yet. But I mean, you're an educator. You understand that there are some times where it really is a process of demystifying what it is. It's just laying out at least the basics and giving people the opportunity to ask more if they want to. And I haven't done it lately, but in some of the early days of the podcast, I tried doing like these "What is Organic" episodes. They didn't get enough traction, so we stopped doing them. But that's the way content creation goes. So for me personally, it is as I talk to people, I try to explain what it is. There is confusion in the marketplace. I don't disagree. There's actually been a lot of talk about the knockoff labels that, they look like organic but aren't. They use a similar color, similar schemes, and it's been a conversation piece. There's just, again, it's like copyrights, it's like patent infringement. It's just, if it's too close, that's when the USDA steps in. There is confusion. We do our best to demystify it when we're talking to people. For the most part, though, the farmers that are asking for certification tend to have an idea, and I deal with that more than the consumers themselves.
Sure. And sometimes you probably help the farmers be able to explain that stuff too. So if you had to give me a 30-second cocktail party speech here, what is organic, Terrance? Like, how would you say it in a simplified way?
Organic is a marketing term given by the USDA that farmers can use to market their products, giving people a general idea of a standard of practice that they perform. I consider it like this is actually the way that I like to think of it. And this is why I think in your context, for what you do, you don't necessarily need certification. Because what it does is it bridges the absence of the farmer relationship. Because a farmer they can talk to you when you talk to your customers. They know who you are. They can ask what you do. Whereas if you're buying something in the grocery store, you don't have that opportunity. But what you do see is an organic symbol, which gives you a minimum expectation of what happened. Even if you don't understand all the minutia of the organic standards, you know that there was a standard somewhere. It's like a form of social proof, really. It's giving people an idea that someone had to validate and verify this product in some way, shape, or form.
That makes complete sense. And so for me, I'm selling to restaurants, so not one of them has ever asked me if I'm organic. That's never even come up because they know how I've already talked about. I'm like, I walk in, I'm like, I don't use any of this stuff. Like, they know what's going on. But I think there's a lot of situations where it can help. Obviously, you mentioned like in a retail environment, right, a grocery store. But I was talking to Jesse about this, and I went to sell a farmer's market with him. I made a video about it too. And he made a point. He's like, no, certified organic helps a lot. People walk by and they see the thing on the banner or on the table. And I saw at least one situation, probably a couple, now I think about it, where people were like, oh, you're organic? Okay, cool. And then they like would approach the table and start talking and buying things. So yeah, I understand that completely. And I think that for a lot of people, it doesn't matter the minutia and all the things we're going to nerd out about and pick apart about organic, not should it be this, should it be that? Like most people know, like, okay, organic is better than not organic. That's like the marketing term. Okay.
They've got an idea it means clean food in some way, shape, or form. And you're right, with farmers markets, this is actually a true story. Because I did farmers markets for the organic farm I worked for like 3-4 years, we got into some markets that already had beef and vegetables because we were an organic farm. It differentiated us enough that we were able to get in, and we still had customers.
Yeah, and I think that, Jesse and I had a lot of talking about this, and that farmers markets are now become more competitive in a lot of areas too. So if you can't differentiate in terms of the quality or type of products you're bringing, it's another thing there. So let's talk about how to become organic as a farmer, and maybe you can give us some basics. And I don't know, like if I wanted to become organic, like how do I do that, Terrance?
So to become certified organic, the first thing is, and we're talking crops right now, because
let's talk veggies.
There's also livestock, and there's also processing. I think you're talking crops. Crops, it all starts with the land. The land has to have had 3 years of organic management, basically a transition period in which it has had no non-organic inputs. So that means no treated seed, no GMOs, no insecticides, no pesticides, nothing that would not be approved for organic use, according to the standards. Now, the hard part with that is that if you talk to a certifier, they're really not going to touch you until you finish the transition. So they don't really hold your hand too much. But once you've completed that 3 years, then you have to work with a certification agency. These are the entities that are basically given permission by the USDA to say people are organic or not. You have to fill out the application. It's called an organic system plan. Tell them basically what you're doing, what your plans are, how everything that you're doing meets the standards, the organic requirements. From there, then the office reviews it. They take a look at it all. Then they send it over to an inspector who shows up and does the inspection. That would be me. And we just check to see if you're following what you say you're going to do. And if you don't, I make a note about it. I tell the agency. They find out whether or not they need to talk to you more. The basics for once you're certified: use organic seed. It's required to use organic seed unless it is commercially unavailable. For instance, with vegetables, there's a lot of different seeds that are not raised organic, but you can get untreated non-GMO. Johnny's does a great job of having both the organic seeds and the untreated seeds. And sometimes there's specific, especially with vegetables, there are specific varieties you want to try that you can't necessarily substitute another one for. That's a case where you just show, hey, I looked everywhere. I can't find this beefsteak premium mega juice tomato in the organic. So I got the untreated seed.
And what about,
and
like,
then from there, it's,
like Salanova is a good example, right?
Salanova is a perfect example.
Right. Okay.
And then it's the case of making sure you don't buy the treated stuff by accident, which usually, again, they do a great job of labeling that stuff. The other part with it is inputs. You can't just go out and spray something. Even though there are approved organic sprays, they don't want you using that unless you've tried everything else not to use it. They want to make sure you've used physical controls, cultural controls, things that don't require spraying something before you go ahead and spray it. And at that, it's required you don't use it in a specific quantity. There are different restrictions. It goes on a nice little list.
All right, so I want to back up before we get into the inspections and all that. If I buy land, I have to own it for 3 years before I can do anything, or are there any exceptions to that?
There is an exception to that. So if you can get an affidavit from the prior land manager stating that he has not applied anything within that 3 years that would be non-organic, then it can be certified. So, and actually a great example is CRP ground. A lot of guys take CRP ground and put it into organics right away because nothing's happened with it. It's just sat there.
What's CRP?
Worst that happens sometimes is it is a conservation program where basically the USDA pays you to not do anything with it.
Okay.
I'm sure that someone on this can correct me on that. It's got a lot of minutia to it, but that's the brunt.
Okay, how about it like in my case, like I lived at my house for a little while and I just turned my backyard into a farm. That's probably an easy conversion.
Generally, it's the only thing is the question is because of your lawn, did they spray anything on the lawn in the previous 3 years, like a fertilizer or a dandelion weed killer? Yeah. That's where it gets a little bit more dicey.
Okay. All right. So
in general, yeah.
Okay. So do you deal with the initial certification or just after they're certified?
So I only deal with them once the agency has reviewed the file. So the agency gets the paperwork. So that doesn't matter if it's their first year certification or I've visited some farmers, they've been certified literally since before the standards existed. And they just like transitioned into the National Organic Standards. So these are guys that have been doing it for 20 plus years now. I visit those guys. I just visited a guy the other day, first year of certification, confused and asking lots of questions. Most of them I was able to answer. And that's just the way it goes.
All right. So let's say I want to get certified. What are some of the procedures, costs, what do I need to provide? Those, like some of the details.
Yeah, so cost-wise, it depends on what agency you work with. Each agency has a different fee structure. One of the more popular ones is they charge you based on your sales volume. So an example would be if you sell between $1,000 and say $10,000, you fit in a certain bracket, you pay so much in certification fees, and then you also have the inspection fee, which is how much I get paid for showing up and inspecting your farm. And each agency is different, though. There are some they charge based on the number of acres of different crops you have because certain crops have higher value than others. It really is a case-by-case basis, depending on who you're working with. You have to pay for it. There is a cost share thing that the USDA does. I don't know all the details on it, but it is available if you just search organic cost share on Google. You have to pay them, give them their paperwork, and wait patiently for them to tell you yes, no, maybe, do this, do that. At the end of the day, you are entirely at the mercy of the certification agency once you start requesting certification. And when I say at mercy of, I mean they're the ones that make the decisions. They're the ones that control the timeline. They do their best to get your file in the order that you've been applied.
Okay, let's talk about a little bit about inspections. Can you talk about what that really looks like and sort of demystify the process a little bit?
Oh, absolutely. So as the inspector, my job is, and I'm going to qualify this with, there are such things as unannounced inspections. So usually it's just a matter of, hey, I get your file in the mail, and then I call you up and say, hey, Josh, this is what my calendar looks like. How would next Tuesday work to schedule your inspection? And that's when you might hum, ha, and on whether or not it works for you. That's why I actually really like visiting first-year clients, because they don't know enough to say, oh, well, that date doesn't work for me. They're desperate to just get it over with because they've been in anticipation too long. So those are my favorite clients to schedule. Once you've got scheduled with them, then I show up, do the walk around. Each inspection is two-part: record keeping and field tour. Field tour is the farmer's favorite part. We go around, we walk around his fields, depending on, If it's a vegetable grower, usually we're walking. If it's like a grain operator with dozens of different fields, usually we're just driving around and visiting them. What we're doing is we're basically just looking at your crops, seeing how they're doing, making observations, ideally making sure that there's nothing that looks irregular in it. We're also verifying that there are appropriate measures taken to prevent cross-contamination. So let's say you're an organic farmer who has a field butted up right next to a non-organic farmer. We are doing our best to make sure you're taking proper controls to make sure you don't have to worry about drift from your neighbor's field into yours. So we do the tour, we walk around, I talk to the farmer. That's where I like to build rapport when I can, just make sure that he and I are on a good page. And that's really important because usually he hates the second part, which is sitting down and looking at his records.
Okay.
And that's when yeah.
So with the records, like, I think that's probably where most people are like, I don't want to do this. Like, I don't want to, it's more paperwork. Like, can you talk a little about that? Any sort of tips? Is there any software? Like, is there anything that as a farmer?
There are software options. I don't use a lot of them. I've met a handful of farmers that use different software and they work. They're great. Really, this is the thing. You can record, and this is actually something I learned from Chris Blanchard. He did a lot of great consulting work with the organics before he passed away. And one of the things he had was each agency has kind of their own forms that you can use to fill out to record your different activities or like what your field plan is or what seeds you use. And that works great. You don't technically have to use their forms. You can use whatever works for you. You just have to give them the information they're looking for. And with the record keeping, it's the exact same thing. You don't have to have the same thing as everyone else. You just have to have whatever works for you to keep your records. So what we're looking for is field activity. What did you do? Where did you do it? And when did you do it? And that is written down. Seed invoices, seed tags, packets, just giving us information to be able to verify that what you said you're doing, you're actually doing.
Okay, so for the first visit or first few visits, are you sort of getting that stuff in line with the farmer, or is that laid out before you come?
Ideally, it's laid out before I come. I, as the inspector, so this is an important thing to keep in mind for anyone listening that they have their inspector show up and they just ask them a bunch of questions. As inspectors, we're not supposed to do what's called overcoming barriers to certification. That means if you're doing something that isn't quite right, I'm not supposed to tell you how to fix it. What I can do is kind of tell you how I see some people doing it, or what I can do is provide quote unquote technical assistance, which is this is how you fill out this box. This is what the agency is looking for in this spot. But I can't say, oh, this is your record keeping system. This is how you should be doing it. And quite frankly, this is the best piece of advice I've ever had for anyone. Use a binder. Just have one spot that you put all of your records for 1 year, all of your invoices, all your receipts, seed tags. I mean, with vegetables, usually like a box works really well to keep all the seed tags in, and you may already be doing that. The point is have a dedicated spot you put stuff and a dedicated routine for when you fill stuff in. So that way it's building a habit and making it as easy to do as possible. Because don't make it complicated. The more complicated you make it, the worse it's going to be for you.
Yeah, with any record keeping, I feel like people have crazy systems. You got to keep it simple. Okay,
it's the only way to survive it.
All right, so I'm thinking, so you have to certify, you're inspecting, let's say, like a lot of different kinds of farms, it sounds like, from grain farmers to animals to veggies. So what's...
I've seen everything.
Okay. And so how far do you have to travel to do inspections?
It really depends. I probably travel less than some inspectors. I know some inspectors, they're just on the road, like all the time, all summer. I picked where I moved to, so I did not have to travel as much. I probably go, I try not to drive more than 3 hours for an inspection trip. There are some times where I make like a 5-hour drive and then I'm there for 3 or 4 days. Generally speaking, I try to make sure I limit it to, I like to be home every night. And that works for me in my location. There are some inspectors that doesn't work for them in their location. It really is a context-dependent thing.
Okay. I want to ask a couple more questions, and then we'll get on to some of the Patreon questions and live questions. So if you guys have questions in the chat, get them in, and we'll get to those in a few minutes. Terrance, can you talk a little bit about the career or job of being an organic inspector? I also know that you're on the board of directors of the, I wrote this down, International Organic Inspectors Association. I know it's a long term, but you're very involved. And like, can you talk a little bit on the sort of the job side of it for you? Because this is
Yeah.
your job. Yeah.
It's a career like any other. It's different because you're working adjacent to agriculture. So I work this full time, and by full time I mean from about the months of June to December. I'm working kind of like a farmer, just pulling lawn days, doing a lot of work. But then from the months of January through May, I'm basically just kind of screwing around doing what I want. And occasionally I will still have an inspection here or there because, like, food processors, obviously they're working all year round, so I can go visit them. But part of what I love about this job is because I hit it so hard during those summer to fall winter months, I don't have to work as hard going forward. I'm just saying decline on this call before it tries derailing everything. Glory of live programming, people. So I got involved in that. No, I'm not answering, Mom. The glory of doing it is that I get a very flexible schedule, but like any other self-employed job, it's one of those things where you have to be on top of it. You have to be managing your finances. You have to be managing, just like farming, you have to be aware, this is my profit, this is my loss. It's just running a business, and you have to keep yourself scheduled, self-disciplined. And I'm an independent inspector. I work for 5 agencies, so I stay really busy. There are some people, they go work for a specific certification agency as a staff inspector, which means they basically just have a regular job doing what I do kind of all year round. So it can vary a lot, but what I do with IOIA, that's the acronym for the International Organic Inspectors Association. They're the organization that trains inspectors. They put out a lot of the training material. They do lots of different trainings for even certification agencies. They just are the premier training institute for what it takes to be an organic inspector. And right now in the community of, because just like we have the no-till growers community, there's an organic inspectors community. And our conversation right now has been human capital. How do we improve and make better inspectors? How do we but how do we continue to promote better inspection practices? Because just like any business or any industry, you're going to have better ones and worse ones. And honestly, some of the best inspectors we've had are farmers. What I find fascinating is that I'm a rare oddity because I do this full time. Not all inspectors do. In fact, most inspectors don't. So you could be a part-time vegetable grower and a part-time organic inspector and just do it as a side hustle. There's a handful of farmers that I know that kind of segued into doing more inspections as they retired. In fact, one of my fellow inspectors here in Iowa was a full-time vegetable farmer that then, as he kind of just started stepping back a little bit from farming, started inspecting more. And now he does a pretty fair amount of inspections, even when he was farming towards the tail end of that.
Okay, so what's the training like? Like, how does that go? If I said, "Hey, Terrance, I want to be an organic inspector," like, how does that work?
So what they do is they have an intensive 7-day course for taking. So each course, there are 3 different, they call them scopes: crops, livestock, food processing, handling. You take the crops one probably. That's usually where everyone starts, that or handling. 7 days, you're getting all this information drilled down into you. I did crops and livestock back to back. So it was 2 weeks of just getting my mind pushed with all this stuff. And I'll also make the comment here, not everyone gets into the program. They have an application process to verify that you actually have a chance. Because, I mean, it's a week. They're not playing around. You have to have a base knowledge of something. And they actually have like a quiz that they basically to prove that you know enough to be able to get in. You'd fill that out, you'd send it in, you'd pay your money, you would take the training. From there, you have to then be apprenticed. And that's actually the process that I'm working with IOA right now. In fact, I can't talk a whole lot about it, but I can tease that right now IOA is developing a mentorship program / apprenticeship program where basically we're going to take a boot camp style of training inspectors once they get out of the initial training. Because right now, the way it works is you have to contact, say, Josh, you want to become an organic inspector. You've taken the training, But before you can work with an agency, they want to make sure you were apprenticed. And so you'd say, "Hey, T, will you be my mentor?" And then I would take you on several inspections. I would be the lead on a couple, then we'd let you be the lead on a couple, and we'd see if you are at a point where you could be on your own and figure it out yourself. Then I would write up my endorsement, basically, give it to you or the agencies if you ask me to give them to a specific agency, and then you'd pick one or several agencies to work with as an inspector.
Cool. I like that idea a lot, the apprenticeship and the sort of the transition. I just think it's cool to hear from someone who does this for work, because I talk about this a lot in that it's not just being a grower is what's important in the community, because we need inspectors, we need compost makers, we need all that stuff, all that other stuff that's going on. So it's cool to hear that.
It's the supporting roles.
Yeah.
So this is where I, even with the podcast and with inspecting, I learned really early on, I'm not a farmer. I love farmers. Some days I really wish I was a farmer. Other days I'm like, oh, thank goodness I'm not good at that. But the farming, I found I had one particular trait that I was really good at. I could talk to farmers. I could talk to people that are non-farmers. I learned that from my years at the farmers markets. When I'm doing the podcast, I'm using that power, that ability, to be able to hopefully share the stories of these different farmers I'm interviewing with a wider audience. When I'm doing it as an inspector, I am the go-between between bureaucratic mumbo jumbo and this is what the farmer is actually doing. This is who he is. And articulating that between both the farmer and with the agency and with the inevitably the USDA.
Okay. Let's get into some questions, and then if there's time, I'll ask you more questions, because it's been great so far. All right, so this couple Patreon questions, and if you guys don't know, our Patreon members get first dibs on questions, and we get those done before we take live questions from the chat. So check out patreon.com/no-till-growers if you like supporting our work, and then you can ask questions for our guests. And the first one is from Matthew Bader. I'd love to hear about Terrance's perspective on the role that hydroponics is playing in the organic space and its ability to be certified organic.
So hydroponics, that is one of the hot buttons. It, generally speaking, was not considered organic, because in the organic standards, I think it's actually the preamble, it specifically states soil. And then, so it was always just tacitly assumed, oh, hydroponics isn't organic. Well, then eventually someone did certify hydroponics. It really wasn't talked about. Well, then eventually it became an issue. Now there's a large discussion on it. From what I understand, it's a lot of a case-by-case basis with different certifying operations. Some certification agencies will certify hydroponics. Some have stated they will not. My general perspective on it is that if it's legal, it's legal. If it's not, it's not. If the standards say that it's okay, then it's okay. It's USDA. They can say what they want. In terms of its role in the marketplace, I think that it has a valuable role in terms of just growing in general, because it's another option for people that don't have access to land to raise food. I think it's a great idea, especially in urban environments. Should it be certified? That's not necessarily for me to judge, but I do have a preference for growing it in the soil, simply because, again, it's a marketing competitive advantage for small-scale farmers that are raising vegetables. It does create a little bit of a, what's the word I'd use? A disadvantage. It creates an imbalance in that a hydroponic grower doesn't have to deal with actual elements. Everything is basically, it becomes a input-based system rather than a soil-based system, because all you're doing with hydroponics, and again, I know there's a lot of different variations. So I'm assuming we're just talking about running stuff in gutters in water, and you're feeding it constantly. You're constantly putting in nutrients. In organics, as a general concept, the idea is you're building the soil, so the soil is putting in the nutrients, rather than oh, I'm just dumping all of this inputs on there. And I can easily say it's the exact same thing with some farmers, even growing in the soil. They're constantly putting in inputs, and that's what's feeding the crop. But ideally, in an organic system, you're building your soil, so your soil's the one doing that work.
Yeah, I mean, I have nothing against hydroponics. I'm just not personally interested in it. People ask me all the time about my take on hydroponics, and then I guess not many people ask me about the role of hydroponics with organic. But I think a lot of growers out there, soil growers, think it's like, pun intended here, but like watering down the the organic certification. And
that's the concern.
Yeah,
there is a movement to keep the soil organic or something like that. I think it's Dave Campbell. I can't remember his last name. Up in Vermont, he's one of the say godfathers of the organic movement. I think he was one of the guys that they gave like the first initial standards to for his opinion. I know he's very vocal against hydroponics, but as I said, it's one of those things where it's not for me to necessarily judge, but
right.
I will agree. I'm always concerned when we make it an input-based system, because the goal is to make it an ecological system.
Well, it sounds like the origins of the organic movement was based around that, so it makes sense that a lot of growers and certifiers would feel that way. Okay, next question. Unless you have more to add about hydroponics.
No, we can move past it.
Okay. This is from Dreamtime Market Gardens. Perhaps Terrance could offer some advice to beginner farmers not yet familiar with all the rules and regulations for certification, but interested in getting it. Thanks.
So the best first step is at most of the organic farming conferences. And again, I'm saying this as the caveat. I understand you might not have access to that right now because of COVID. I'm hoping that we're getting some live conferences again here in the near future. But one of the best ways to get information when you're a new farmer is contact a certification agency. There are a dozen of them. I personally, my advice is always go to the one that's located in your state because they have a better idea of who you are as their client. They are the best option to get more information for where to start. And at an organic trade show, usually like Acres USA, Moses, the Midwest Organic Sustainable Agriculture Education Service Conference, they've got a plethora of different certifiers there. You can kind of just shop around, talk to different certifiers, kind of get a feel of which ones work better for you. Because I'll be honest, not every certifier is best for every type of operation. There are some certifiers I work for that are amazing with food processors, and they do certify crops and livestock. But their angle is they're really good at processors, so they're not necessarily as good with the farmers themselves, just because it's such a different animal compared to what the majority of their work is. And then there are some agencies, they are primarily livestock. Some agencies are primarily crops. Just kind of shop around, get an idea. The best thing, besides talking to a certifier, if you have a neighbor that's certified organic, talk to them, ask them questions. I always get a chuckle. I can tell when, usually if I've got one farmer that's certified with a particular agency, if one of his neighbors gets certified, it's with the same company. It's because he could ask his buddy questions on how to fill out the forms. That's really what it is. So best thing to do, talk to neighbors or friends that are organic, talk to people at trade shows. Those are the best solutions.
Okay. Yeah, my first thought was like find a farmer near you that's doing something similar, like growing vegetables, animals, processing, and they're certified, and then I think they'll know the certifier probably. And
they usually know the certifier, they know the forms, they know the process, and here's really the thing. It makes you feel more comfortable because there is an element of social proof. It's that okay, they've gotten authority and legitimization from having someone you trust already trust them.
Cool.
It's like when your friend says, "Oh, get a Subaru because I've got a Subaru," and you're like, "Oh, my buddy, he's got great taste. He has a Subaru, so I'll get a Subaru."
Right, and they'll tell you like which model they like and how that all works. And okay, cool. All right, so Oak Knob says very snazzy dresser. I guess that's from you.
Hey, you know what? I wish I almost wore my suit. I almost did. But then it was one of those things where I got busy. This is my inspection like get up is I wear this.
Okay.
I wear my suits on Sundays and when I'm not inspecting, and then inspecting, this is me. I look like a knockoff of Indiana Jones. What can I say?
Okay. Okay. Uh, I know you sent me those photos, and I was like, yeah, Terrance always looks good. He's always like making us farmers like look like slobs. Um, is that it? Is that the difference though? You like to dress nicer, so that's why you can never be a farmer. No, I'm just kidding.
So no, but I have so true story. I will one of these days I will have like a photo shoot where I am dressed in my tuxedo. I'm wearing muck boots and I'll be holding like a soil probe like this, like James Bond. And I'll get that photo made. I'll turn it into a poster and we'll make it like Terrance Layhew, organic inspector.
All right, Terrance, if we ever get to meet up in real life, I'll take the photos for you.
Bless you, and you'll do a fantastic job.
All right. So we got my buddy Gene in here says, are there any organic inspection issues with having household pets in the beds? Is that an issue? And like, how does that get managed and dealt with?
So yes, and it's for the same reason. So I haven't done it in a little bit, but I'm also a GAP auditor. So good
Okay.
agricultural practices. I'm sure lots of the listeners are familiar with those. It's all about manure. Is there potential for contamination from manure and especially vegetables? The harvest window is a lot smaller than with field crops. That's where the issue could be potentially is could your animal have left some droppings? That would be the only issue organics has, because organics has the exact same rule as in GAP, where it has to be 90, 120 days, depending on where the crop sits on the ground.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit on that actually? Like, I know
Yeah.
I get a lot of people that ask me, especially coming from like the homesteading world where, if you're going for yourself, there's no like you have to wait so many days or whatever.
Yeah.
People want to run animals through areas or things like that. Can you talk
Mhm.
on some of the specifics there?
So the organic standard says that you can use raw manure, but it has to be applied if the crop is close to the ground or on the ground. It's supposed to be applied no sooner than 120 days prior to harvest. And if it's above the ground, so like I use corn, soybeans as my comparison. If it's above the ground, it's 90 days. Now, do we know for an absolute fact that 90 and 120 days are the difference between E. coli spreading and not E. coli spreading? No, we don't. But these were the numbers pulled from scientists or someone when they wrote these standards. And as I said, good agricultural practices have the exact same requirement. In fact, I visited one Amish farmer who I came to do his GAP audit, and I'm talking to him. And I'm like, oh, when did you apply manure last? He's like, oh, on that field? Yeah, I applied it yesterday. I'm like, but you're harvesting cucumbers. And he's like, yeah, I kind of forgot. I know I'm not going to be able to be GAP certified this year, but I figured, hey, let's go through the process and I'll pay you anyway. I just figured then I know for next year. Like, it's your money, it's your time. Sure. Okay. And so that's the requirement. And it is because, again, we're just trying to mitigate risk. Really, all the requirements in the organic standards. First of all, if there's a standard written for it, it probably means someone stupid did it. That's the reason for a lot of rules. The second thing is it's risk mitigation. You're just trying to minimize potential for risk. And in organics, it's all about maintaining organic integrity. How can you ensure that the crop has not been defiled or molested with something else that was not organic approved? It's in GAP, it's basically food safety. It's the same general idea, except you're asking, is there anything that could have affected the safety of the food? Or my favorite way Chris Blanchard put it was, GAP is all about poop. It's, could it have gotten poop on it? When did the poop get on it? How do you keep poop from getting on it? And how do you get rid of the poop if it did get on it?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I don't use any raw manures. Everything's been composted if we do use some. But yeah, I always, when I talk about food safety with people I work with, it's like, just you got to get the soil off of it. Like for me, it's like if there's any contamination, it's going to come from the soil. So I think that's a good practice. Can you talk? I didn't know about your GAP, doing GAP as well. Can you talk a little about what GAP is and how that works?
Absolutely. So GAP certification, GAP audits are basically food safety standards. I can't remember the exact year it came out, but basically what I did was the harmonized gap audit, which was previously there was like GHP, which was good handling practices, and good agricultural practices, GAP. Eventually, someone had the brilliant idea, since these two things are very similar, let's just combine them into what we call the harmonized standard. And so that's what they did. It's similar to, the reason I was able to do it was because it's so similar to organics in terms of the concept, which is risk mitigation, critical control points, and all you're doing is you're evaluating the potential hazard. Is there anything that could affect the food, either biological, chemical, or physical? So an example of physical hazard would be the washer machine. Is the washer going to leak oil? That's chemical also. Is there an opportunity for mold? Is there an opportunity for bacteria of any kind? When you're washing the produce, are you using the correct sanitizer? Do you have to worry about having a pump tank that could potentially have some mildew build up in it that then affects the crop? Again, you're always just trying to mitigate potential risk. And that's a lot of what food safety is, because the last thing anyone wants is for someone to get sick because of something you sold them. So, as in both standards, there is value. With GAP standards, you fail the system, someone could die. Organics, you fail the system, well, no one's physically going to likely suffer. So, between the two of them, I think the food safety one isn't addressed often enough. And I think there's a lot of value, again, in a marketing standpoint, in that, let's say you're selling to a large grocery chain. The other thing I didn't mention is traceability. And that's something that exists in both organic and not. Basically, what it does is it allows you to be able to verify that you can follow back the crop from the time it was sold to when it got planted, to the seed you bought. That way, should you ever have a recall issue, especially in food safety, you find out, oh, my horse pooped in this field after you sent off the box of cucumbers, you can potentially be able to get that box of cucumbers back.
Okay, so in terms of GAP certification, I think people need to realize that sometimes the customer will ask for that. If it's a grocery store,
correct,
a restaurant chain, a school, maybe like something like that, where they're going to be buying food from you.
It's very, because again, in those cases, it is such a safety concern,
right?
Especially when, I mean, they're distributing on such a large scale.
So how
that's when.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, that's in the context where, again, very rarely does the farmer say, ooh, you know what? I'm going to be GAP certified. It's, I'm selling to this co-op, I'm selling to this grocery store, and they say, great, we love that you're a local farmer. How do we know for certainty you're not going to poison people by accident?
Right, and I think that's awesome. And people ask me personally all the time. They go, "What certifications do I need? What licensing do I need?" I'm like, if you're just like, in most places, if you're just selling vegetables, you're not processing them, cooking them, fermenting them, like you don't need anything. Like you can just sell them. But you got to find out like who you're selling it to and what they want. So have you seen like an increase in, like the organic certification or the GAP certification? Like how has that trended over the last 5 years?
I think it's just going up. In fact, I know for a fact. So I haven't done any GAP certification inspections in the past 2 years. And that's specifically because I just became too busy with the organic ones, which says something about the fact, that organics are growing. But I also know that the GAP are growing too, because I got a call from the auditor I used to work for saying, hey, are you sure you can't do any for us? And can you recommend anyone else that can possibly? There's a growing demand for it because, again, I think what we're really looking for is verification. I've used the word verify a lot in this discussion. It's because that's what these audits are meant to do, is to give some degree of peace of mind knowing that someone has verified that what the farmer is claiming to have done is actually being done. Now, obviously, no system is 100% perfect, but what it does is it gives a certain level of security. And I mean, the fact is, food, I think we can all agree after COVID, people are buying a lot more direct from the farmer. People are buying a lot more delivery. And in both those cases, I think that we're going to see more and more as the circle increases. So let's say you're marketing your crops online. again, they don't necessarily have the option potentially of knowing you in person beyond watching your videos. And so maybe them looking over your information and seeing, oh, he's certified organic. Oh, he's also GAP certified, so he's food safety. And if that's properly communicated in your story, it can make a dramatic difference when they're choosing between ordering from you or ordering from someone else.
Yeah, I think it makes more sense as you scale up as well, because it unlocks other opportunities that you may not have been able to get previously. I also think that there's probably more organic inspections just because there's more farms. I think there's more and more people opening smaller farms, which tend to probably be more often organic. Do you find that to be the case?
Yes. And I mean, part of this is just commercial viability. And I will admit, the thing that has impressed me most is to see, usually I visit a lot of grain farms. I don't get to see nearly as many vegetable operations, but in the grain farms, usually they don't have a lot of acreage. And one of the reasons they're getting certified is so that they can still make their farm a viable economic machine. And in some cases, it's just so their families can then be involved. So like the next generation can be a part of it. And even down to land acquisition, sometimes that actually makes a difference because let's face it, a lot of landlords these days aren't living in the communities. They've got the land through an inheritance because grandma or grandpa passed away or dad and mom passed away, and now they're living 2 states away, but they have this land in the middle of nowhere, Iowa. They get rent to an organic farmer, their land becomes inherently more valuable.
Right. And
versus renting it to someone else.
Right. And as you were saying, it's like mostly a marketing thing in terms of like being able to sell your food better. I tell farmers all the time, like, everyone is so focused on the nerdy growing soil stuff, and they need to focus on the business side of it. And I think in a lot of situations,
I completely agree.
Those certifications can help quite a bit. So, all right, let me get to another question here. Let's see here. Mindful Skateboarding says, I have a septic tank in my backyard. Do I need to be careful where I grow vegetables and such? Do you have any experience in that situation?
I haven't had that pop up too often. The main thing is just making sure that the septic tank, I mean, so much of it, this is context dependent. I don't know what it looks like. This would be a case where I would say, if you're seeking organic certification and this is your context, explain to the certification agency where everything's positioned, and they can tell you, oh, that's enough distance. Oh, that's not enough distance. Because again, we're just avoiding the potential risk, which is, oh, your septic tank leaking into your vegetables, which I hope you'd be concerned with the potential of, whether you are certified or not.
Right. Okay. So can you give us any like stories about any, I mean, no names or anything, obviously, but like, are there any like crazy, like you walk in, you're like, you really are like, this is really going on? Can you share any of those kinds of stories or not really?
So I can share one story. I see this partly because this has become a recurring theme. So I have a buddy that's a certified organic farmer up in Wisconsin, and he is asking me the holy grail of organic farming when it comes to corn is how can you grow corn on corn on corn? Because, corn's easy to grow. You don't have to worry as much about it. Cultivate it 3 times, rotary hoe it 3 times. I'm oversimplifying the process. I know farmers are going to complain. The point is, a lot of farmers like growing corn. It's always got a market. Well, there was this idea where we plant a cover crop. We basically field of hay, and then we drill corn into the hay standing, and then we extend, instead of 10-foot rows, we do 20-foot rows, something like that. We plant another one, and then another. So what you've done is, the idea is then you shift that 10 feet every year, so that you've got, it's less than 10 feet, but I'm just using the example.
Makes sense.
So then you can perpetually be growing corn in that field. I showed up to one farm, and I looked down at the ground and said, oh, I thought you were raising corn. All I see is hay. He's like, oh, no, there's corn there. There's corn there. And sure enough, we look down, and there's just like little corn starting to emerge from the soil. They were just trying this experiment, see how it works. Well, I'd heard about this idea from my buddy like 3 weeks beforehand. So it was perfect timing for me to actually understand what he was trying to do instead of wandering in going, what the heck is going on here? Because then I, as the inspector, have to figure out how to explain to someone sitting in the office what's going on. Since then, I have seen this like 5 or 6 more times, And I will be quite honest, I have never seen it work successfully, but people keep trying to do it. So now I feel like I'm the guy that shows up the moment I just see a field of grass and I see corn on their program. I'm like, oh, you're trying the rotation through the field. That's right. How did you know? Just a lucky guess.
So is that just so they can get around the crop rotation rules of organic standards?
Well, it's not getting around it. It's trying to do corn on corn while following the crop rotation standard. Because the idea
That's what I
is you're
mean.
still
Yeah, yeah.
following the standard of rotation, but you don't have to then alternate the crop you're actually planting. You've got a perennial crop just there, which, again, the theory is great. The practice doesn't tend to work very well. I'll tell one other quick story,
Sure.
and this is more or less because it makes me laugh every time. There was a new farmer. He had one field of soybeans, had very little idea of what he was doing. We're inspecting him in, I'd like to say it was November. It was just after a snowfall. This normally doesn't happen. Normally, if it's a first year farmer, I'm out there at least by July so that he's got a certificate in time. But he's got a standing field of soybeans covered in snow. And between us and his field of soybeans, he's got cattle. And, we get through one gate, close the gate, then we drive through the other one. He leaves the gate open. And we're talking, just, I'm asking him questions, looking at his soybeans through the snow. And then all of a sudden we hear this beller. And all of his cows looked over, who were standing in a field of snow, saw this field of soybeans. Granted, they still had snow on them, but they were green by comparison to the grass that was no longer. They charged right in and just started eating and eating. I didn't have that farmer for about another 30 minutes. His neighbors came to help him round up the cows. But I remember thinking at the time, gee, why didn't he close the gate? I assumed he had a reason to do it. Since then, every farm I show up at, we go through a gate. I ask, do we close the gate? Are there livestock we need to worry about? Because, you know what? It's an inconvenience to me, too, if you are chasing cows around for an hour and a half.
Right. Well, you got a good story out of it, at least.
You know what? It's always about the story, right?
Right, right. So I want to, if you guys have any more questions in the chat, make sure you get them in. But Terrance, I want to talk a little bit about podcasting, too, and your podcast.
Absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit about the show and sort of the guests you have on and sort of the overall sort of goal and idea of it?
Yeah, so the Intellectual Agrarian Podcast I started, I think it was back in 2015. And the name, I joke, is the greatest and worst thing about it because it's a bear to spell. But the moment I say, oh, would you like to be on the Intellectual Agrarian Podcast? 9 times out of 10, they're like, the farmer or person that's agriculture adjacent that I ask are like, oh, that sounds amazing. I'd love to be on the show. Maybe someday we'll rename it. I love the name. It came out of the idea of the Jeffersonian Agrarian Intellectual. I was sitting at an Acres USA conference, and Joel Salatin talked about being a Jeffersonian Agrarian Intellectual. And that was at the point where I was trying to wrestle with, where's my place in agriculture? I'm here. I'm not good at it, but I'm here. So what is my place here? And I've always been a little bit more of a smart cookie. Sometimes people would say a smart aleck or a smart worse. And so the idea of being an intellectual agrarian appealed to me. I figured that's something I could do. And when I started the show, the idea was to interview people that use ideas in agriculture. Agrarian, I get asked most commonly, what is an agrarian? An agrarian is someone from the field. That's literally the definition. It's of the earth. It's of the agra, field, Ian, person. And I love getting to highlight the stories of these farmers. They're trying different things. I got to interview a farmer that was using what he called cowbro science, which was they were trying to do a season extension for grazing their livestock. What he read about in Japan or China, I can't remember which, them using like bamboo as a grazing stock because it lasts a little bit longer. And then upstate New York, so they have a short grazing season. And he planted bamboo and gave that a try. Remarkable. I've got an interview with Lee Grace from North Star Bison. He's a former competitive bodybuilder and deadlifter. I mean, these are some of the people I've gotten to talk to. I mean, I got to talk to Joel Salatin. I've gotten to speak to you and Jesse. These days, I don't do it as much as I'd like to, just because, again, time commitments. But where I'm trying to shift my attention is it's not so much about how much volume I put out. It's that I'm really creating a catalog of really interesting farmers that I've had the opportunity to talk to. I mean, we also got to interview, I can't remember her name. She wrote The Metabolic Approach to Cancer. Absolute Dr. Nasha Winters. Brilliant book. We got to speak to Eliza Eliazarov, who's done some amazing portrait photos for the Modern Farmer magazine back when they had the print magazine. These are just some incredible people, and the conversations I've gotten to have are absolutely astounding because, like talking to you even, what is it that brought you to agriculture? Asking that one question unpacks such a unique story that each person brings to why they're doing what they're doing now. And on top of it, it's not even necessarily maybe that farming's the most important part to their lives. I've had Scott Hebert on the show several times, and farming somehow becomes less and less of something in his life at times. But he's always still doing it, and he's always trying something different, and it's always an interesting conversation. And that's really the joy that I have in it. And I know I'm rambling at this point, but
it's all good.
It's quality conversations. I mean, it's what we're doing now. It's how is the conversation? What is the story? What is the thing that we can perhaps learn from?
Well, that was a great way to sum that up, and I think the name fits perfectly. Don't change it. And I've had a couple. I think twice now we did the podcast, but
yeah, we've done 2 interviews.
Yeah. I'm always down for more, Terrance. So anytime. And I think
Fantastic.
that I interview farmers not only like virtually with this show, but farmers I go to visit and film, and I am always amazed by the people, their stories. That is always. If I can try to capture even a little bit of that in a video, like that's so special. Like, because people come from so many different kinds of backgrounds. I mean, you talk to 10 farmers, there's 10 backgrounds. I think there's a lot of first generation farmers out there, and it's just absolutely fascinating.
I couldn't agree more. It's amazing to see what draws people to it, because not everyone gets into it for the same reasons, but I find it fascinating to see how such a wide spread of people. I mean, it's part of why I love going to a farming conference for. Is I joke, you can see everything from it's the only place you can see Amish people and hippies in the exact same room, or like high-powered businessmen. I mean, you get such a wide swatch of the human condition in one place, and they're all working towards the same goal. They may have different politics, different religions, different motivations and life purposes, but at the end of the day, they're trying to accomplish it through the same general practices. And that's one of the most fascinating things I get to see.
Yeah, you think food is common amongst everybody, right? And we all need food. We all need people to grow food. And I've really tried to, for the most part, keep my content focused on that. And it's very easy, I think. And I don't know if this has come up in your world as a content creator, is like, once you have an audience, you're like, maybe I'll talk about this other thing. And then I'm like, no, that's not what this is about. This is about the common good of growing food healthy in a way that's healthy for the planet and for the people. I recommend everyone check out Terrance's podcast. There's a link to his website down below. Terrance, is there anything else that you'd like to add to this conversation before maybe we try to wrap it up?
No, thank you again for inviting me on the show. This has been an absolute pleasure. I love getting to talk about what I do and the different people I get to meet.
Awesome. I think it's cool just giving some basic information and some more advanced information about organic inspections, the certification process, GAP certification, and then a career as a inspector. I don't think anyone, or I don't think a lot of people would even consider that an option for some people that are interested in this but don't want to be farming. So I really appreciate everything you do, Terrance, and thanks for taking the time tonight to join us.
Thank you again.
All right, guys. So big thanks to Terrance for coming on the show. I've really enjoyed getting to know Terrance over the last few years and chatting whenever we get a chance to. And it's interesting to bring up different kinds of topics for this show, too. And again, apologize for the technical difficulties. And I think we got it working, so we're all good. But I really appreciate all of you guys hanging out and joining us on these Tuesday evenings. And hopefully everyone's doing well out there. And we'll see you guys soon.